Oh, good.
Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back. We again are just making this work when we both have time. So we appreciate you following through. And hopefully, if you are still following along in your book with us, you'll the content is just causing you to kind of rethink your own childhood, your own parenting. And if you haven't been,
Maybe your parents' parenting.
and your parents' parenting, and if you haven't been keeping up with us, we would encourage you to do that, because really, as we've gone through this book, it's been insightful for us, even as parents of adult children, or young adult, emerging adults, and just even things that, it's not too late to change some of your approaches.
No, it's never too late.
And to really reflect on like what's happening with you. I watched a webinar this week, and honestly, I'm sure the intent wasn't for me to feel like a bad mom after I watched it. It was about screen time and brain health. And I was just like, oh man, I wish I could go back 10 years. And not that that wasn't the intent, but now I can really be more mindful in my work with you all, and also in just some of the things that I can encourage my young adult children as they continue to be growing up in a electronic world. So
yeah, I'm so glad I didn't grow up with.
I know,
because everything is documented. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what that means for my childhood, but
Yeah.
I'm glad it wasn't documented on film.
Well, and I think it goes into just exactly what we're talking about. And we are on page 133 in the book on step 9, facing your triggers.
No thanks.
And nobody wants to look into this. Nobody wants to really check yourself at the door. But this is an exciting step to growth. And if you've followed us up until this point, then you are also on this journey, and knowing that some of these conversations can feel pretty personal, and really just force us to look in the mirror about our own responses and reactions to our kids and where that comes from.
Yeah.
Because it comes from somewhere.
It does.
Just like the stuff that your kids are dealing with, it comes from somewhere, and it's not always about you, and it's not always personal. So how can we help our kids recognize that and validate and accept them for just who they are and what they're going through, and how to help them do it in the best way possible?
So let's talk about not blowing things up.
All right. So triggers, just to clarify for those of you, many of you, all of you have probably heard about triggers before. They're just things that I love the way they define it in this book. Is, Dr. Shfali just says it's a thing. It's a thing. It can be a phrase, it can be a name, it can be a situation,
it can be a look,
it could be anything, and it's just a thing. It's a neutral thing that happens, just like, oh, it's raining, oh, the light is in my face, oh, it's hot, it's just a thing. Or, oh, somebody said hi versus somebody said shut up, I hate you. It's just there. Okay, so if we start just from the basics by trying to see things neutrally, it can help diffuse our reaction to it almost immediately.
Well, and I think a lot of times when I hear people talk about triggers, it's something that they talk about it as something that kind of happens to us, and then we've got no control over how we respond.
Exactly.
And so that's disabling. And what we want to talk about as far as your triggers is that you can be empowered to identify that's what it is. It's just a thing, and I can choose the way I'm going to respond to it. And I like the way she kind of talks about it. The thing itself isn't the trigger, it's just a thing. It's how it's interpreted and metabolized internally or emotionally. So it's not the thing itself, but how you emotionally metabolize that. I like that kind of, because we take in our experiences and we somehow break them down, process them, or don't process them, but we hold them in our system. And then when something comes along, it might, if we haven't processed it appropriately, comes along and flips that switch.
Yes. Right. Yeah. She says that triggers are like flames, right? That they are just kind of like the pilot light that's sitting inside of you. And when something comes along, it will either put gas on it,
Mhm.
or it'll either smother it out.
Mhm.
And when we have things that ignite those flames, then those are our emotional reactions to it. So if that helps you kind of understand that, there are 3 examples of, she kind of just says, the more triggers that we see in ourselves, the more flammable we are. And but if we can start to recognize those and figure out what those triggers are, and then take a pause, right? Like what's the flame or the triggering event?
Mhm.
Then she talks about inner holes, like where are the gaps that we have in ourselves that are making those, like fanning the flames,
Right.
right? Like what are we feeling insecure about, or our ego, or what are we feeling frustrated about or
Mhm.
disappointed about? And then those are the things that are filling us either with water to put the flames out, or gasoline, or even explosives sometimes. And then how do we react to those things?
There's a good example of a parent and his 8-year-old son. He had gone to one of the seminars, and he had this realization moment, how the dad had been fighting with his 8-year-old almost every day because of his own triggers. And I think we've talked about that without calling it a trigger before, like when you want your child, or when you were raised very athletic and team sports and everything, and that there was an incongruence, like for your youngest who didn't participate in sports the same way, and that could have been a trigger for you if you'd had some lack of processing, where it, like, not like that felt weird to you, but for some, weird is like, nope, that can't happen. And so that's what was happening with this dad and this son, because he wanted him to be hyper masculine. He wanted him to be athletic and all that kind of stuff, and his son was just not like that. His son had speech and learning delays, and wasn't going to those qualities were really difficult for the dad. Says even though he loved his son, he was still getting into daily battles with him. And the final straw was when the dad threw a glass of water on his son and dragged him by his jacket, slamming him into a wall. That's a really good example of a trigger that had oil thrown on it. Right. And I mean, the son had done nothing wrong, but because of something that the dad hadn't metabolized properly, he was taking out some of that inner child pain onto his son.
And the thing is that once we can understand where that comes from, like it just doesn't come easily. You have to really sit back and think what interior and internal need of mine is not being met, that I'm trying to find in other places. And when you understand that thing outside only triggers you because of your internal emotional explosives, then that's a turning point. And that's where I think, on 139, that the paragraph right before she talks about how to put it into practice is really talks about our own projections and inner explosions. And, we don't want our explosions to make holes in our kids,
Right.
because then they are still
It
looking
just
for
keeps
ways.
going.
Yeah, it's this
Yeah.
terrible cycle.
Yeah.
So a strategy that she talks about to put this into practice is called flipping it around. And then just to try and take a second to ask yourself, have I ever been triggered by this part in myself? So like when something is happening that's triggering us, we see it in someone else, right? Like my kids aren't doing this, or they're not doing what I want them to do or what I think they should do. And then to try and stop and think, like, has that ever happened to me? Or where does that come from? Or would I be triggered by that too? Because chances are we probably are. We just haven't looked at it that way.
Well, and in the story of this dad, that's when he flips it around, he's like, have I ever been triggered by, because he has a feminine side, or it isn't the man's man, boy's boy kind of thing. Because he was teased and called a sissy when the dad was, when he was younger. So now he sees his son not able to be the man's man in the group, and so it's out of fear, really. He's like, I don't want this to happen to my kid, so I'm going to toughen him up.
Yeah.
Right. And which ends up not being helpful, obviously.
Yeah, because when the dad was teased and bullied, he felt like he was weak. So then he turned to a life of going to the gym, working out, being buff all the time. So he was then trying to fulfill the need from his childhood that he didn't have met. And then when he saw his son being weaker in his mind, then that triggered his own childhood, his lack of need. To heal, and I'm going to read this right from the book. You need to forgive that old part of yourself and treat it with compassion. Once you acknowledge it and recognize it, you've just killed it, buried it, and moved on. But sometimes to heal, sorry, I'm going to reread that. If you have killed it, buried it, and moved on, it's not healing. But to heal, you need to forgive that old part of yourself and treat it with compassion. So if we continue to bury it or not recognize it or not acknowledge it and not, kind of bring it to the light and be like, you know what? That's why I'm so determined. And maybe because of the choices I made or the situations I was in as a child or the needs I didn't have met, it's turned to me to subconsciously try to force my kid into the making it happen for me.
Well, and I think it's important to remember, and I've gone through this myself, like when we go through difficult events in our life, whether it be, abuse or any of those kind of things, if we're talking about metabolizing it, right, emotionally. And for a lot of us, for our own self-protection, we get a really fancy box. We open the box, we put all of our pain, all of our trauma, all of those things that have hurt us in this box, and we close it and we wrap it up and we put 17,000 layers of wrapping paper on it so it can't open
and
again.
Duct tape.
And we put it up on the shelf and it just doesn't work because that thing is just going to jump out and slap us across the face sometime. And so if you're having these kind of triggering moments, then you've got to spend that time and say, why did I respond that way? And sometimes we can come up with that answer. We can find that explanation inside of ourselves. And sometimes we really need help from a professional to kind of tease out that kind of stuff. And needing help from a mental health counselor to kind of deal with some of those traumas and those triggers doesn't mean that you're not doing something right or that you're weak or anything. Sometimes we just need like a tour guide to kind of how do we find those holes, right. How do we find those flames that continue to keep blowing stuff up and we don't know where they're at,
right? And it's not I think one of the best strategies to think about is, instead of feeling a lot of heavy blame or shame for where we're at in this, just maybe ask yourself, could it be? Could it be that this is something that is related to my own personal childhood? Could it be that this is something triggering to me because of where I'm at and what I feel like I'm missing, right? And then, because the parts within us, and this is what I like about Dr. Shafali, is that the parts within us that we have rejected or disavowed or abandoned don't just disappear. They just are buried deep within us, which is what you just said about your box. And our own past wounds wash over us with such pain that we enlist our ego with a furor. And then our ego comes up to protect us, right? To say, what do you mean? I'm a happy, successful adult. I have 3 successful kids. I have and then it's just then we're just pushing it back down. So, if this is a hard step for you, maybe just use that phrase, could it be that this is coming from somewhere else? Again, from a mindset of curiosity. So
dysfunctional loops. Well, you've got a lot highlighted. You better start this one.
Step 10, breaking those dysfunctional loops. So when we think about we're thinking about these looping cycles, right? Like anytime that we have a trigger and then it causes a behavior, and then we, most times, and this is a challenging part that we work with a lot of families on, is that when those things happen, the blow-ups happen or the conflicts happen, then a couple things. Either one, the family just disengages and everybody goes their own way, and it's, politely forgotten and not addressed again, right? Yeah. Or it gets to be so big that a whole bunch of other nastiness comes out and dredges up all the other things that the wave brings in from the ocean, right? So most times families do not, what I like to call, end on a positive,
Right.
right? Like we can have these disagreements and these blowups and these meltdowns, and we can come back when we're calm and try to find a solution, or at least try to communicate about, a compromise. So that's what breaking these dysfunctional loops is about. These loops cause stress, tension, conflict, and sometimes, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I can also say it's my ego that says this isn't my problem. It's your fault. If you would only just, you didn't this. So who breaks the loop? And then I love, do you dare to be the pattern disruptor in your family? Because most times, the pattern disruptor is the black sheep, right? The person who ruffles the feathers when everybody else is dysfunctional. The person who's trying to make the family functional is seen as the bad guy.
Yeah.
And that's really hard. I see a lot of writing on that topic. Actually, a lot of good things in general. And I don't know if I've mentioned this before on here. Dr. Nicole LePera, LePera, I think.
So.
I follow her on social media, and I think she's phenomenal about just some of the healing ways that not only we can deal with, but other people in our families, and how we can be more mindful of some of those dynamics of childhood. And it's a path of self-healing, which I really like. And she's very sincere and sensitive to some of the challenges that people face.
And I would say, like, the question that she says, do you dare to be the pattern disruptor? And that's really on us.
Kids can't do it.
Like when we're talking about a cycle with a 13-year-old, a 7-year-old, they're not wired to stop that cycle, right? And they can far outlast us if we want to keep going round and round and round. I mean, that's we have to figure out how to do that. And that is when there are deep ingrained cycles and habits that we have within our family, like whoever says uncle first is the weak person. And I've seen this many times with families where, you've got a parent and a child that are going at it and around and around and around. And even in that moment, like, you have to stop, like one of you has to stop. Who do you think it's going to be? Right. Yeah. And we get so ingrained in those patterns that it's a hard pattern to stop, but it's necessary and really important.
And the momentum gets going so quickly. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I have a family that, not recently, but in the beginning, these snowballs would just happen. And like, literally, I'm sitting there watching this all transform, and even my coaching could not stop the momentum.
Absolutely.
It was going like mad,
like a freight train.
And afterwards, I literally just sat there almost stunned. Like, believe it or not, I was almost speechless. And I just looked at the adults, and I was like, what just happened there? Like, did you see this coming? Like,
right.
Like, I was flabbergasted. And after that, like, it is such a journey that, that coaching and therapy and, conscious work can help undo, but it takes so much time and conscious effort.
It's hard work.
It's
hard work, but I have worked with, I've had moments like that with my own kids, and like, how did we get down this rabbit hole? Like rational thinking is 5 miles above my head. Like, how did we get here? And it was 5 minutes ago, we were like in a meadow picking daisies, and now like can't even see the sun. So, I mean, it happens to everybody. But starting to see those patterns and disrupt the cycle, even if it's just like, oh wait, like we're where we shouldn't be. So let's take a time out, everybody take a break, and we'll try again.
And the next couple pieces we're going to talk about are, like, as you kind of listen or just reflect or follow through, there's a couple different ways that this sounds and looks with people, and we'll just go through them really quickly. But if you remember a couple videos back, we talked about the imposter ego, right? And we try to like pretend who we are. Well, in this part of the parenting map where we're trying to really break this down. The fighter is one of those egos, and the fighter loop. So let's just pretend, your kid says, I hate you. What does the fighter do? The fighter immediately is, this is going to stop. I'm in control. We're going to, you better watch your mouth. How dare you say that to me? And that's the fighter response. Okay. So if that's you, just be mindful, maybe make a note. Part of me is a fighter sometimes, which I admit I was. The fixer loop. Okay. Now you can imagine these loops, right? If the parent's the fighter, this is going to just continue. Of course, I hate you. You don't do anything for me. Well, watch your mouth. Okay. You can imagine
all the things I do for you.
Right?
You
right?
owe me respect.
How dare you? All I need is a little gratitude.
Yeah.
The fixer loop. Fixers try to control the child's perception. I hate you. Well, but I do everything I can to try to help you, and let me just come over and fix this for you, and I'll try to make it better. I'm really sorry. Like, so that again, and I'm
Do
not.
you want ice cream?
Yeah, I'm not. We're not doing this to judge, right? We're not doing this to judge anybody, but it's an enabling mindset that wants to rescue your children and ensure that your children don't abandon you.
And can I say that a lot of times as parents, when we're doing this, we're thinking that we're being helpful. And she points out, even in this loop, the parent's reaction creates negative feelings in the child. Okay. It's still not a positive reaction, even if you're, getting them to stop being mad at you for a minute. It's that cycle is going to end up being really difficult.
I feel that's like pushover, right? Like the child learns manipulation from the get-go. Like, oh, my mom and dad are so weak that I can push them over, and now, but then what that really says to the child is my parents aren't in control, and there's no grown-ups in this situation, and I'm a 6-year-old kid, and now I'm afraid because what the heck does this mean for me? I don't know what I'm doing. Although the kid can't reason that.
No.
The feigner loop, feigner's image and public persona are most important here. So if, God forbid, they're in public and the kid says something or has a tantrum or a fit, oh my gosh, how does everybody, what does this look like to everybody else? And, oh, don't do that. You've never said that before. Oh my gosh, why are you acting this way? I can't believe it.
Hey, if I buy you Snickers, will you shut up for a minute? Yeah,
just be quiet. Well, I'll give you candy when we get home. But again, these negative feelings in the child, right? Like, I'm ashamed of you. I'm embarrassed of you. The freezer loop, when these freezer parents hear their children say, I hate you, they interpret it as it's personal. I'm going to put up a wall. I'm going to isolate you.
I'm not going to let you hurt me.
Yep. And think about, I made a note about family cycles in this because I think this is the part that I mentioned earlier, that when people say mean things or hard things, we just put up a wall and we ignore it. We sweep it under the rug. But what if, right, to break the cycle, what if we said, those are really big feelings? Wow, you must be hurting. And we try not to put up that wall. We try not to freeze out people. And we try to then create that environment where we can talk about these things and we can validate feelings and we can work through them. And, I don't see that as easy in any situation. I mean, even people who practice this and teach this stuff, I mean, it's hard. It's hard, especially when you're so emotionally invested in your children and just the love and the hope you have for them. Yeah.
But whenever we shut that down or ignore it, it really they don't, because they are having big feelings. Now it's not safe to have big feelings with my parent. So, and I'm supposed to be somebody's supposed to help me feel safe, and they're not doing it. So I'm either going to look for somebody else outside that can make me feel some approximation of safe, or I'm going to just start putting up walls myself.
Yes. The fleer loop, fleers run from responsibility and struggles. So, if your kid says, I hate you, well, it's not my problem. Well, you need to toughen up.
I can't deal with you today. I gotta go. I'm out.
I don't have time for you. Don't bother me. with your petty feelings.
I'm not listening to that nonsense.
And we know, right? So let's just quick review. You've got the fighter, all the F's. Fighter, fixer, feigner, freezer, and fleer.
Yeah.
Okay. So those are the 5. And as much as these loops are toxic, right? The reality is that we can start being more attuned to our children for who they are and what they feel. Okay. It is reality that we were raised unconsciously.
It's true.
So we pass some of this stuff on to our kids without even knowing it. So once we heal from within, we can finally stop reacting from our inner holes and instead respond from a place of inner wholeness. I like that.
That is good.
Inner wholeness.
That is good.
So to put this into practice, here's a little strategy. There are some signs and symptoms that, just to be aware of. So just to kind of a recap, the fighter's emotional style is anger.
So if you feel that like building in you, you're going to feel those kind of sensations in your body.
The fixers is anxiety. The feigners is attention seeking. The freezer's emotional style is avoidance. And the fleers is abandonment. Now, you might see a predominant style of your own, but chances are there's pieces of this in all of us. So how do we break that cycle? One of the biggest things is to grab a piece of paper, and on the left side of a blank page, write down your ego-based emotional reactions to your triggers. Okay, so maybe put like your emotional responses. So for example, an emotional reactive style would be, in anger, if you were the fighter. If you were the fighter in anger, you might respond to something like, I don't want to be near you when you're mad. Leave me alone, right? But what are the feelings? Then on the right side of your paper, you would write the true feelings that come from that. So it's not that I really hate my kid or I really don't want them to leave me alone. It's that what they said hurt my feelings. Okay. So the anxiety, if you're a fixer and your emotional style is anxiety, if the emotional reaction style is, I'm going to fix this. I'm good. I need you. I need you to be my best friend. I need
you to need me.
I need you to need me. Your true feelings might represent, I'm scared you're not going to love me. Okay. So you see how you could do this when you notice some of your triggers and you notice your emotional response, like I'm mad, I'm angry, I'm avoiding you, I'm abandoning you. And then what are the true feelings that are coming out of that?
Did you ever post that emotion circle? Because on page 152, it talks about, so we're talking about feelings and reactions to feelings. So helplessness is a feeling, but blame is an emotional reaction. Vulnerability is a feeling, a very scary feeling sometimes, but anger toward another who has violated that vulnerability is an emotional reaction. So that's kind of the 2 columns, like what is the true feeling? What's that vulnerable piece that hasn't been met? And then how can we react to it in a non-blaming, anger reactive way? How can we continue a conversation without shutting that down?
If I didn't post that, I'll post it again, because a lot of this is exactly what we think is a really valuable foundational strategy to teach families when we start working with them. Is about emotional regulation, about recognizing what emotions are happening in your body, trying to intervene and naming it, right? Like I'm feeling, even if your kid has to say, I'm feeling confused, I'm feeling, overwhelmed, then just that is a great start, because you don't really have a name for your feeling, but if you can put something to it, like I'm just feeling like a tornado. Yeah, we get it, right? Okay. Then what do you do with it? Okay, if you're starting to feel like a tornado, before your tornado touches down, guess what? Let's go get a glass of water and take a break, or let's go tell mom that we need to talk to somebody, and that's the kind of thing that we are trying to teach our own, our own injured internal selves, because wow, where's this coming from? what do I need to do to acknowledge it and to name it, and then to recognize it and to heal from it or to cope with it.
And sometimes we don't know what to do to stop the cycle, but we can maybe start with, let's interrupt the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to use my son as an example. He called me a couple weeks ago, and he said, Mom, like, I want to change the way I respond to this situation. He's like, in the past, I would just check out. I would go like I would feel myself getting upset, and I'd just be out. And that doesn't help relationships. And I want to do things different, right? Yeah. The freezer and flee. So I'm like, okay, so if you're not gonna hit the eject button, then what are you going to do to stay? What are some things? And so we brainstormed a little bit, and it doesn't solve the situation, but it interrupts the cycle and helps train the wiring in us. Like, there might be a different way to respond. And I'm going to try this. And how did that work? And then I'm going to try this. And how did that work? What feels best?
Changing the pattern.
So sometimes I think when we're trying to interrupt a cycle or change a pattern like that, we're like, well, what are we going to do instead? And sometimes we don't know exactly what the thing is, but let's do something different. Like, instead of yelling, we're all going to take a drink of water first. And then we'll see what we do after that. Like, it can be something simple just to kind of reset.
Right. And some of the work, I don't know if you've done much reading about vision work, but envisioning what that looks like for him then, right? So the next time, see yourself, if it happens in the office, right? So see yourself sitting in the office, your coworker comes in, says this to you, see yourself like, okay, they come in, they say something that upsets me. I see myself there feeling angry, but instead I'm going to say or do this, like envisioning a positive outcome. There's some really great research about envision work and how that can help relate to more successful solutions. And being prepared.
You can also, with an older kid, you can switch roles.
Do a little role play
and say, okay, I'm going to say to you what you said to me, and you respond how you want me to respond to you.
Right.
Like, and you can kind of do that kind of stuff. It's not for everybody, but if they're old enough that they can kind of be in that.
Right. And we do that a lot with siblings, right? Like, you be your brother and I'm going to be you. Right. And I'm going to punch you, or I'm going to take your toys. I'm going to smother you. I'm going to, push you down.
Yeah.
Now, how does that feel? I don't like that. Stop. I don't like that. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, that was steps 9 and 10. We are going to keep this one short, and we'll be back next time with steps 11. That'll get us up to stage 3. So thanks for listening. And as always, let us know if you have any comments or questions below.
See ya.
Take care.